For 3,500 years, one mummy remained completely sealed. The only royal pharaoh never opened by modern archaeologists. Kings and queens had been unwrapped, studied, examined with every tool available to science. Ancient tombs had been invaded by both grave robbers and legitimate researchers, their contents catalogued and analyzed, their secrets extracted piece by piece. But Amenhotep I stayed untouched, preserved in pristine condition behind layers of linen and a golden mask that no researcher dared to disturb. For 140 years, he sat in museums, visible yet unknowable, present yet inaccessible. When scientists finally peered inside without touching a single layer of wrapping, they discovered something that rewrote everything we thought we knew about ancient Egypt's most secretive burial practices, about the nature of kingship in the New Kingdom, and about the extraordinary sophistication of ancient embalming techniques. His name was Amenhotep I. He ruled Egypt from 1525 to 1504 BC, a young pharaoh who inherited a kingdom his father had rebuilt from chaos. The Hyksos invaders had been expelled, borders restored, stability returned. Amenhotep I stepped into a land that had just rediscovered its own greatness, and for 21 years he maintained that strength, constructing temples to Amun and securing Egypt's position as a superpower in the ancient world. He was never supposed to be forgotten, but for the better part of 2 centuries, he was. When archaeologists discovered him in 1881 at Deir el-Bahari near Luxor, they recognized something extraordinary. The wrappings were perfect. The decorative flowers were still visible. The cartonnage mask covering his face was painted and inlaid with stone eyes, creating an image of divine majesty untouched by time. Every other royal mummy had been unwrapped. Ramesses had been examined. Tutankhamun's secrets had been aired before the world. But Amenhotep, I was different. His wrappings were so beautiful, so immaculately preserved, that the decision was made immediately. Do not touch him. Do not unwrap him. Let him remain as he was meant to remain, sealed and sacred, a perfect monument to the craft of ancient embalmers. For 140 years, that's exactly what happened. Amenhotep. I sat in museums, displayed behind glass, studied only from the outside. 2 X-ray examinations were conducted in 1932 and 1967, but the technology of those eras couldn't reveal much. The images were blurry, inconsistent, raising more questions than they answered. By the 1960s, people had stopped trying. Amenhotep. I had become something like a legend, the untouchable one, the pharaoh nobody dared to open. But legends don't stay untouched forever when science keeps advancing. In 2019, Sahar Salim, a professor of radiology at Cairo University, decided something radical. What if there was a way to unwrap him without actually unwrapping him? What if modern technology could let them look inside without ever removing the linen, without ever risking damage to the mask or the wrappings or anything else? It was a wild idea. It was also the perfect solution. Salim had spent years studying mummies using radiological techniques, examining preserved human remains with the same medical imaging technology used in hospitals to diagnose diseases in living patients. She understood the potential of CT scanning better than almost anyone else in the field. She knew that the technology had advanced so dramatically since those early experiments in the 1930s and 60s that an entirely new world of detail could be revealed. But she also knew the risks, the potential for damage, the need for absolute precision in such a sensitive undertaking. Salim reached out to Zahi Hawass, one of the most renowned Egyptologists in the world. Hawass had spent his entire career studying ancient Egypt, serving as Egypt's Minister of Antiquities, supervising some of the most significant archaeological work in the country's history. If anyone understood both the scientific value of examining Amenhotep IV and the sacred responsibility of preserving him, it was Hawass. The 2 of them began planning what would become one of the most significant studies of a royal mummy in modern times. They decided to use computed tomography scanning, CT technology normally used in hospitals to examine living patients. A CT scanner takes thousands of X-ray images from different angles, then uses advanced computer software to reconstruct those images into detailed 3-dimensional models. The resolution is far superior to old X-ray technology. The detail is incredible. Most importantly, it's completely non-invasive. You could scan an entire mummy without touching it, without exposing it to anything harmful, and generate images clear enough to see what lay beneath centuries of careful wrapping. In 2021, they brought Amenhotep IV to a hospital equipped with cutting-edge CT technology. The scanning process was conducted with extraordinary care and precision. The mummy was positioned on the CT scanner bed, and the machine began its work, rotating around the remains hundreds of times, taking thousands upon thousands of X-ray images from slightly different angles each time. Each image captured a thin cross-section of the mummy, revealing what lay at that particular depth. The entire process took hours, requiring patience and expertise to ensure that every detail was captured without any risk of damage or contamination. The computer then stitched all of these images together into a complete three-dimensional model, using advanced software algorithms to interpolate and construct a full representation of the mummy's internal structure. They could now see the cartonnage mask in perfect detail, examining every crack, every piece of inlay, every artistic element that had been crafted to immortalize the pharaoh's face. They could see the linen bandages underneath, layer upon layer of carefully wrapped cloth, some of which had been applied 3,500 years earlier, and some of which had been applied during the 21st Dynasty restoration process. They could see the body beneath all of it, the bones and remaining soft tissues, the amulets buried within the wrappings, the evidence of both the original mummification and the later repairs. They could see everything Amenhotep I had been and everything that had happened to him since he died 35 centuries earlier, all without ever causing him harm. The results were published in December 2021 in the prestigious journal Frontiers in Medicine. The paper was authored by Sahar Salim and Zahi Hawass, and it immediately generated significant attention in both academic and popular circles. What they revealed contradicted centuries of assumptions about ancient Egyptian mummification and the history of Amenhotep III himself. More importantly, it demonstrated a new methodology for examining precious archaeological remains without risking damage or destruction. This single study would influence how museums and researchers around the world approached the examination of ancient mummies and other fragile artifacts for decades to come. First, there was the pharaoh's appearance. The three-dimensional reconstruction of his face showed a man with an oval shape, a narrow chin, a small and delicate nose, and mildly protruding upper teeth. According to Sahar Salim herself, who described the findings in her research, Amenhotep: I seem to have physically resembled his father, Ahmose I, the man who had expelled the Hyksos and founded the dynasty that would produce some of Egypt's greatest rulers. They shared the same facial structure, the same bone construction, the same genetic inheritance. Amenhotep I had inherited more than just a kingdom. He had inherited his father's face, his father's bone structure, his father's genetics. For the first time in history, people could actually see what this ancient pharaoh looked like, not from artistic representations or statues created by artists trying to capture the essence of kingship, but from the actual bone and tissue preserved within the wrappings. There was no interpretation, no artistic license, no idealization. This was the authentic face of Amenhotep IV, as he truly appeared. They determined his age at death based on the condition of his teeth and bones. He was approximately 35 years old. That meant Amenhotep had likely ascended to the throne at around 14 years old, possibly even co-ruling with his mother for some years before taking full control. He had ruled for 21 years during a critical period of Egyptian history, a time when the nation needed stability and strength. And then, for reasons science still doesn't fully understand, he died. There were no visible wounds, no signs of disease, no indicators of what might have killed a relatively young pharaoh in what appeared to be good health. But the body itself told a remarkable story of remarkable preservation and unique ritual practices. Unlike most other pharaohs, Amenhotep II's brain had not been removed during the mummification process. The ancient embalmers had left it inside his skull, which was extraordinarily unusual for a royal burial. Most other pharaohs, including the famous Tutankhamun and Ramesses II, had their brains extracted through the nasal passages and discarded. But in Amenhotep I's case, his brain remained intact. This suggested something profound about either his religious beliefs or the beliefs of his successors. There was something sacred about keeping his brain intact, something that made the priests who originally mummified him and those who reburied him decide that this particular pharaoh should be preserved whole in a way that was completely different from standard practice. The heart, however, had been deliberately preserved in the left side of his chest with an amulet placed directly over it. In Egyptian religious belief, the heart was the seat of consciousness, the organ that would be weighed in the afterlife to determine if the deceased was worthy of eternal peace. An amulet protecting the heart was a gesture of profound spiritual importance. The embalmers who prepared Amenhotep I were not just performing a technical procedure, they were conducting a sacred ritual, investing considerable effort and expensive materials into ensuring his successful journey to the afterlife. The CT scans revealed something even more significant. His body had been eviscerated through a vertical incision on the left side, a standard practice in Egyptian mummification to remove the internal organs. These organs would normally be treated separately and placed in containers called canopic jars, each one protected by a different god and dedicated to preserving a specific organ. But in Amenhotep I's case, something else had happened. His body cavity had been packed with natron, a naturally occurring salt that would dry out and preserve any remaining tissue. It was a technique refined over centuries, perfected to the point where even 3,500 years later, the preserved remains showed no significant decay, no major deterioration, no obvious damage beyond what age and time naturally caused. Then there were the amulets. The CT scans revealed approximately 30 individual amulets and pieces of jewelry distributed throughout Amenhotep I's wrappings. Some were small, delicate talismans, meant to offer spiritual protection during the dangerous journey through the afterlife. Others were more substantial jewelry pieces, ornaments that spoke to the wealth and status of the man who wore them. Most notably, there was a beaded metallic girdle that was likely made of gold, adorned with intricate patterns and craftsmanship. In an age where gold was one of the most precious substances known to humanity, rarer and more valuable than land or labor, a king's burial with such extensive goldwork indicated immense wealth and power. The amount of precious material invested in Amenhotep II's burial testified to his importance. Amenhotep. I had not been buried like a common noble or even a high-ranking official. He had been buried like what he was, a divine being, a living god, a pharaoh of Egypt, deserving of the finest materials and the most elaborate preparations. But here's where the story became even more complex. The CT scans also showed clear evidence of significant post-mortem damage. Amenhotep I's mummy had been attacked. Tomb robbers had gotten to him at some point during antiquity, physically damaging his remains as they searched for valuables, for jewels, for anything that could be stolen and sold on the black market of ancient artifact dealers. His head had been wrenched away from his neck with considerable force. His left arm had been detached from his body. There was even a defect in his abdominal wall, suggesting violent tampering with the mummy after burial, as if someone had cut or broken through the wrappings to access the internal cavity. But here's the extraordinary part. Each of these injuries had been carefully repaired. Someone had deliberately taken the time and effort to fix what the tomb robbers had destroyed. This wasn't a quick cleanup job. This was detailed, respectful restoration work. Amenhotep's head and neck had been reattached to his body using a resin-treated linen band. The resin would harden over time, creating a strong bond that would hold the pieces together for centuries. It was skilled work, medical work, the work of someone who understood anatomy and preservation, someone trained in the techniques of mummification and restoration. His left arm had been carefully repositioned and wrapped back to its proper place alongside his body. The defect in his abdominal wall had been covered with a protective band and further safeguarded with 2 additional amulets placed underneath for spiritual protection, ensuring that even the damaged areas would receive magical protection for the journey to the afterlife. This was the 21st dynasty. The Ramessid period was over, Egypt had fragmented somewhat, and the priests of Amun in Thebes had become exceptionally powerful, wielding influence over both religious and political matters. They had begun an ambitious project to protect the royal mummies of their predecessors, many of whom had been damaged by tomb robbers and threatened with destruction. The tombs in the Valley of the Kings, where so many pharaohs lay buried, had been targeted repeatedly by thieves throughout the centuries. By the time the 21st dynasty came to power, many of these royal remains had been ransacked, their precious contents stolen, their mummified bodies desecrated. Amenhotep. I had been one of these royal mummies selected for rescue and restoration. Priests brought him out of whatever damaged tomb had harbored him, assessed the damage meticulously, and carefully, lovingly, respectfully repaired it. They were not stealing from him, they were saving him. They were taking a pharaoh who had been violated and making him whole again. The scientific examination revealed something that had been hotly debated among Egyptologists for decades. Earlier researchers had speculated that when the 21st dynasty priests reburied the royal mummies, they probably removed valuable amulets and jewelry to use in the burial rites of more recent pharaohs. It was assumed they would have plundered Amenhotep II's wrappings for any gold, for any valuable objects, to repurpose them for their own rulers, or perhaps to fund their temples and religious institutions. It seemed logical, even inevitable, that priests with access to royal treasure would take advantage of that access. But the CT scans proved this assumption completely wrong. All 30 amulets were still present, exactly where they had been placed 3,500 years earlier. The gold girdle was still there, intact, undisturbed. Nothing had been taken. The priests of the 21st dynasty had acted with impeccable integrity, handling Amenhotep I with reverence, preserving him as he was meant to be preserved, and asking nothing from him in return. They had simply ensured that he would survive to be discovered by future generations. It was an act of pure respect, motivated by religious duty and spiritual commitment rather than personal gain. One other detail emerged from the scans that initially seemed minor, but turned out to be historically significant. Amenhotep. I was the first pharaoh documented to have been mummified with his arms crossed at the chest. This posture would later become a standard feature of royal mummification, adopted by subsequent pharaohs as part of the formal ritual of preparing a king for the afterlife. Amenhotep. I didn't just inherit his father's kingdom. In a very real sense, he set the standard for how future pharaohs would be buried. His body became the template, his mummification the model that would be followed for centuries afterward. The dental examination was also revealing. His teeth showed minimal wear and decay, indicating either excellent dental health in life or careful diet, or possibly both. The stone teeth that were part of some ancient artificial dental work remained intact. This suggested someone who had lived a relatively comfortable life, someone who had not engaged in heavy manual labor, someone who had been fed well and cared for. Everything about Amenhotep III's physical remains indicated a life of privilege and protection. But the questions remained, and in many ways they still remain unanswered. How did he die? Why was a pharaoh in what appeared to be excellent health suddenly taken from the throne at only 35 years old? Did he fall ill with a rapid-acting disease, an infection or plague that struck him down before anyone could treat it? Did he suffer an accident, a fall, or a hunting mishap that proved fatal? Was there a conflict, an assassination, a religious or political crisis that removed him from power? Did he abdicate willingly, stepping down for reasons lost to history? The CT scans could show his bones and tissues, could reveal details of his physiology and his general health status, could tell the story of his body and how he lived, but they couldn't tell the story of his death. The moment when this young pharaoh breathed his last, that mystery remains unsolved, preserved in the silence of 3.5 millennia, a secret that died with Amenhotep I and has not been recovered by modern science. What the discovery of Amenhotep I did reveal was something perhaps even more profound than a simple answer to the question of how he died. It revealed the care, the precision, the spiritual devotion that ancient Egyptians brought to the process of death and burial. It showed that mummification was not a simple preservation technique. It was an elaborate spiritual practice, an expression of belief in an afterlife, an investment in eternity. Every amulet placed in Amenhotep II's wrappings was placed with intention. Every wrap of linen was applied with purpose. The priests who originally mummified him and the priests who later repaired him were engaged in sacred work, honoring a king not just in life but in death as well. The study also demonstrated something revolutionary about the future of archaeology and the future of how we relate to the cultural heritage of the past. For centuries, archaeological investigation meant destruction. To know what was inside, you had to open it. To examine what lay beneath, you had to unwrap, uncover, expose. The early Egyptologists who excavated tombs and opened mummies did so with the best intentions, driven by genuine scientific curiosity and the desire to understand ancient civilization. But the methods were crude by modern standards. Countless mummies were damaged or destroyed in the process of studying them. Irreplaceable artifacts were lost. Ancient knowledge was lost because the technology didn't exist to examine remains without disturbing them. Tissue would desiccate and crumble when exposed to air. Bandages would deteriorate. Mummified remains would become fragile and vulnerable to damage once their protective wrappings were removed. But Amenhotep I changed that paradigm. The digital unwrapping of his mummy proved that we could study ancient remains with extraordinary detail and precision without any physical interference. We could see inside without opening. We could examine without damaging. We could learn without destroying. This approach is now being applied to mummies and artifacts across the world. Museums from Cairo to London to New York are beginning to re-examine their collections using CT scanning and other non-invasive imaging techniques, making new discoveries about remains that had been studied decades or even centuries earlier with far cruder methods. The implications are profound. Countless precious artifacts and remains that have been locked away as too fragile or too valuable to examine can now be studied in detail without risk. At Semmelweis University in Budapest, researchers equipped with cutting-edge photon-counting CT scanners are examining Egyptian mummies from the Hungarian National Museum. The technology is even more advanced than what was used for Amenhotep I, producing images with unprecedented resolution and detail. They're discovering misidentified remains, revealing previously unknown health conditions, understanding mummification techniques in ways that would have been impossible just years ago. In Chicago, researchers at the Field Museum scanned 26 mummies from their collection, generating thousands of three-dimensional images that revealed details about the lives and health of ancient Egyptians. Some of them suffered from osteoporosis. Others showed signs of dental disease. One mummy that had been cataloged as a human head for decades was revealed through scanning to actually be a human foot that had been misidentified. The legacy of Amenhotep I extends far beyond what his own mummy revealed. His digital unwrapping proved that archaeology could evolve, that science could advance without causing damage, that we could honor our fascination with ancient civilizations while simultaneously respecting the sacred nature of human remains. The ancient Egyptians believed that preserving the body was essential for the continuation of life in the afterlife. Amenhotep I was preserved through their efforts, and through our modern technology, we can honor that preservation by examining and learning from it without ever compromising his eternal rest. The Mummy of Amenhotep I now resides in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in Cairo, where it continues to be displayed for public viewing. Tourists and Egyptologists alike stand before the golden mask and the linen wrappings, knowing now what lies beneath, because of the work of Selim and Hawass, and the commitment to non-invasive scientific investigation. They can imagine the face of the pharaoh, understand his approximate health and appearance, appreciate the care that was taken in his burial. They are seeing him, in a way, for the very first time since the moment he died. 3,500 years is an enormous span of time. Civilizations rise and fall, languages change beyond recognition, entire peoples disappear from history. But through the careful work of ancient embalmers, through the respectful preservation efforts of 21st dynasty priests, and through the modern technology of contemporary scientists, Amenhotep III has survived. His remains tell us about the sophistication of ancient Egyptian medicine and spirituality. His body demonstrates the level of craftsmanship and care that characterized the new kingdom. His story reminds us that our fascination with the past is not voyeuristic or disrespectful. It is a genuine attempt to connect with our ancestors, to understand the complexity of human civilization, to appreciate the remarkable achievements of peoples who lived in a world utterly foreign to our own. Amenhotep, I was sealed for 3,500 years. The lock on that tomb remained unbroken, not because the technology to open it wasn't available, but because of a conscious choice to leave him undisturbed, to respect his rest, to honor the wishes implied by the care taken in his burial. That choice proved to be exactly right. When the decision finally came to examine him, we had the technology to do so without violating the sanctuary of his tomb. We could satisfy our curiosity about the past without disrespecting the present. We could learn the secrets of ancient Egypt without destroying what we came to study. That balance, that respect for the sacred nature of human remains combined with the scientific drive to understand our past, may be Amenhotep II's greatest gift to us. He remains, even after 3,500 years, a teacher. He teaches us about ancient Egypt, about the sophistication of a civilization that created monuments that still stand, that developed systems of writing and mathematics that still astound us. He teaches us about the art of mummification, the precision and care that ancient embalmers brought to their work, the deep spiritual beliefs that motivated every step of the process. He teaches us about death and the rituals surrounding it, about how people in an ancient world understood mortality and what came after. He teaches us about the continuity of civilization, how priests thousands of years later still honored the wishes implied by a pharaoh's burial, still treated his remains with respect and care. But most importantly, he teaches us that we can be stewards of history without being its destroyers. We can be curious without being careless. We can be investigators without being vandals. We can examine the achievements of the past without violating them. The untouchable pharaoh was finally touched, but only in the most gentle and respectful way possible. Modern science made it possible to examine him without disturbing him, to learn from him without damaging him. And in being examined with such care and respect, Amenhotep I has given us gifts of knowledge that will continue to illuminate our understanding of one of humanity's greatest civilizations for generations to come. Each new discovery about his remains, each new detail that emerges from the scans, adds another piece to the puzzle of who we are and where we came from. And that knowledge, that connection to our distant past, is worth far more than any treasure that tomb robbers could have stolen.